The moon was blood red, painting the sky a terrifying hue as Detective Ricardo felt a chill run down his spine. He stood before the abandoned Blackwood mansion, his breath caught in his throat. A figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes gleaming with a strangely familiar light. It was Isabella, the witch, but something was different. Something wrong. A scream echoed from the house, a scream of pure terror. Had Isabella lost herself in the mysteries of ancestral magic, or had a much greater, much darker force imprisoned her? What happened inside that cursed house? The wind howled like a hungry wolf around the Blackwood mansion, making the windows creak like the teeth of a skeleton. Ricardo, the detective with weary eyes and an even wearier heart after so many strange cases, felt the night's chill penetrate to his bones, a chill that didn't come only from the icy wind. It was a soul-chilling cold, a supernatural chill that seemed to emanate from the house itself, an invisible monster lurking behind the cracked walls and broken windows. He remembered Isabella's face, the witch emerging from the shadows like a ghost, her eyes bright. But now there was a deep fear in them, a terror that cut Ricardo more than any bullet ever had. That scream. It still echoed in his ears, a thin, ragged cry, full of agony and despair. A scream that seemed to plead for help. A scream that called him into that deadly trap. Ricardo remembered how it all began. That first investigation that brought him into contact with the supernatural world. A world he had always denied existed, but which now, right before his eyes, challenged him to question everything he had ever believed. Isabella, with her hair as black as night and eyes as bright green as emeralds, was a witch unlike anything he had seen in films or read in books. She was modern, sarcastic, even a little irreverent. But behind that mask of sarcasm, he felt the immense strength, the magical ancestry that ran in her veins, an underground river of power and mystery. It was a force that he, in his logic and skepticism, had always tried to understand, and which surprised him more and more each day. He admired her, despite her questionable methods and her refusal to follow the law. The attraction between them was undeniable, an invisible force, as powerful as Isabella's enchantments. But now, fear dominated him. What had happened to make that strong woman, so self-assured, utter that terrifying scream? What was happening inside that cursed house? Ricardo hesitated for a moment. Fear whispered in his ears, urging him to flee, to get away from that madness, to return to the reality he knew, a world without ghosts, witches, and black magic. But the scream, that scream of terror, echoed in his thoughts, an urgent siren pulling him into the darkness. He couldn't abandon Isabella. Not this time. With his heart pounding in his chest, like a martial drum announcing an imminent battle, Ricardo approached the mansion's door. The wood was rotten, worn by time and moisture, almost crumbling to the touch. He pushed it open with force, the sound of old wood creaking accompanying him like a sinister soundtrack. A fetid, damp smell hit him, mixed with a sickly sweet aroma, as if dead flowers were used in a macabre ritual. The interior of the house was a scene of abandonment and decay. Walls covered in mold, dusty and destroyed furniture, cobwebs like macabre veils floating in the stagnant air. A deafening silence hung in the air, interrupted only by the creaking of the house itself, as if it were breathing or groaning. Ricardo lit his flashlight, the beam of light cutting through the darkness like a sword, revealing strange shadows that seemed to move on the periphery of the light. He felt he was being watched, that a malevolent presence was hiding in the darkness, lurking. Suddenly, a metallic clang echoed from the back of the house, like the sliding of metal against metal, breaking the sepulchral silence. Ricardo braced himself for the worst, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He knew he wasn't alone there. Something evil was lurking, and from the sound, it seemed to be preparing to attack him. Fear, of course, hit him with full force, but he was determined. He would save Isabella, no matter the cost, even if it meant facing the devil himself. Fate or ancestral magic had brought him there, and he would move forward, facing the ghosts and the darkness, towards discovering the truth behind that desperate scream. The search for Isabella and the fight against an invisible power that threatened him had only just begun. Ricardo advanced through the mansion, each step echoing like thunder in that oppressive silence. The flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing endless corridors that seemed to stretch and twist, as if the house itself were trying to trap him in its labyrinth of horror. The nauseating smell of mold and something sweet, almost sickening, clung to his throat. He remembered the old books he had read about black magic, about dark rituals and terrible entities. Had Isabella gotten involved in something beyond her comprehension? The metallic clang echoed again, closer now. Ricardo felt a shiver run down his spine, fear mixing with adrenaline. He ran towards the sound, the flashlight trembling in his hands, illuminating faded paintings, broken furniture, and ancient objects covered in dust. With each step, the feeling of being watched increased, as if invisible eyes were watching him from behind the shadows. He arrived at a large, decaying hall. In the center, a pentagram was drawn on the floor, made of still burning candles, which cast dancing shadows on the walls. Around the pentagram, strange objects were scattered. Blackened crystals, bones, dried herbs, and a bubbling cauldron with a dark, viscous liquid that exhaled a fetid odor. Ricardo felt nauseous, a deep malaise. That was a black magic ritual, without a doubt. But where was Isabella? Then he saw her, bent on the ground, near the cauldron, bound with rusty iron chains. Her black hair was spread on the floor, her skin pale, and her face was bathed in cold sweat. Her eyes, normally bright and full of life, were empty, unfocused, as if her soul had been ripped out. Ricardo ran to her, his heart beating erratically in his chest. "Isabella!" he shouted, his cry echoing through the hall. He tried to free her, but the chains were firm, preventing any movement. At that moment, a figure emerged from the shadows, tall and imposing, enveloped by a sinister and dark aura. Its face was covered by a hood, but Ricardo felt a chill run down his bones, a visceral terror that paralyzed him. The figure extended its hand, and from its finger, a black flame emerged, floating in the air like a malevolent serpent. Ricardo recoiled, stunned. He had never seen anything like it. It was black magic, a terrible power, far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The figure spoke, its voice hoarse and guttural, echoing in the silence of the hall. "You shouldn't have interfered, Detective. Isabella is an important piece in my plan, and you will be the sacrifice." Ricardo knew he was in mortal danger, but he wouldn't give up. He had fallen in love with Isabella, and the strength of that feeling propelled him to fight. He looked at Isabella, her gaze pleading for help. He had to find a way to defeat that creature, to save Isabella. But how? The creature let out a malevolent laugh, a cackle that seemed to scrape Ricardo's soul. The battle for survival and for love was only just beginning. The red moon continued to watch the scene, a silent witness to the struggle between good and evil, between light and darkness, in the heart of that cursed mansion. The force of ancestral magic faced the determination of a skeptical detective, and Isabella's fate hung by a thread. The suspense was sharp. Ricardo knew he needed to act fast, or they would both lose the battle. Fear and adrenaline mixed, creating an uncontrollable force that propelled him in search of a solution. But what would the next step be? How to save Isabella from the clutches of darkness? The cold air of the Blackwood mansion penetrated Ricardo's bones, but fear was an even deeper ice, gripping him by the soul. The hooded figure, emanating an aura of evil power, was the personification of terror. Its laughter echoed through the hall, cold and cruel, as the black flame floated like a hungry snake, ready to strike. Ricardo felt Isabella's empty gaze, her lifeless eyes a silent plea for help. He had to act. He had to find a way to break the spell, to free the woman who was becoming more and more a part of his life, despite the supernatural world that surrounded them. In a desperate act, Ricardo remembered Isabella's words about the ancestral force that flowed through her veins, a force that could be channeled, controlled, transformed. In his mind, the witch's words echoed. Not all magic is darkness, Ricardo. The force of nature, the purity of the elements that can overcome the darkness. He remembered the herbs, the crystals, the raw power of nature. He needed to use magic against the darkness. With a new wave of determination, Ricardo ignored the pang of fear in his heart. He observed the elements around him, looking for a foothold, a gap in the darkness. His eyes fell on the blackened crystals near the cauldron. They seemed different, purer than the others, and vibrated with a subtle energy. It was as if they were calling to him, radiating a faint light, almost imperceptible in the midst of the darkness. It was a risk, a gamble, but it was all he had. With surprising speed, which even he himself didn't know where it came from, Ricardo threw himself at the crystals, ignoring the approaching black flame. He grabbed them, his trembling hands feeling the energetic vibration of the crystals. He concentrated all his strength, all his despair, and all his love for Isabella in that single act. He closed his eyes, imagining the sunlight, the force of the wind, the purity of the water, the resistance of the earth. He took a deep breath, channeling all his energy. The crystals shone intensely in his hands, the light emanating from them like a beacon cutting through the darkness. The black flame recoiled, hesitated. The hooded figure let out a cry of surprise, its voice full of anger and disbelief. The crystals became brighter, and the energy emanated from them in powerful waves, bathing the hall in a dazzling light. The hooded figure tried to defend itself, but the light was too strong, too powerful. It screamed, a scream of agony as the light enveloped it, burning its dark aura. The pentagram, symbol of the evil ritual, began to unravel, the candles extinguishing one by one. The chains that bound Isabella broke with a bang, and she fell free to the ground. Ricardo ran to her, hugging her tightly, feeling the warmth of her body, the beating of her heart. She was weak, dazed, but alive. The hooded figure, undone by the light of the crystals, dissipated into black dust, leaving behind only a deep silence, a silence that, this time, was not of terror. Ricardo looked at Isabella, his eyes full of concern. He knew it wasn't the end, that the forces of evil still existed, but now they had more strength, a stronger bond that united them. They had overcome the worst together. They had overcome the darkness together. Ricardo kissed her forehead, feeling the tears running down his face, mixed with sweat and dust from that cursed mansion. Love, that love he had always doubted, that love that bloomed between two worlds, had been stronger than the darkness, stronger than black magic. The red moon was still in the sky, but the terror had passed. A new dawn, even if stained by the shadow of what they had faced, promised a new beginning for Ricardo and Isabella. The mystery of the Blackwoods hadn't ended, but they, together, were ready to face any challenge that arose. The adventure continued, and the fight for love, which transcends dimensions and realities, had only become more intense. Ricardo hugged Isabella tightly, feeling the warmth of her body against his, a comforting warmth that contrasted with the glacial cold he had felt moments before. She was weak, her eyes still a little empty, but alive. The immediate danger had passed, but the tension hadn't completely disappeared. The feeling of relief was as intense as the exhaustion Ricardo felt in every muscle of his body. He helped her up, his fingers meeting hers, a strong connection that went beyond physical touch, a bond that transcended the fear and black magic that had haunted them. Together, they left the Blackwood mansion, leaving behind the extinguished pentagram, the strange objects, and the nauseating smell. The red moon, which had been a silent witness to their struggle, now seemed less threatening, more like a silent observer of their journey. The fresh night air was a balm, cleansing their lungs of the fetid odor of black magic. But the relief was short-lived. Upon reaching the mansion gate, they saw something that froze the blood in their veins. In the sky, a constellation of stars formed, a constellation they had never seen before. It was a constellation in the shape of a large eye, an eye that seemed to observe them, an eye that radiated a cold and menacing energy. It was a supernatural eye, charged with immeasurable, terrifying power. And in the center of the eye, an intense glow emerged, a point of light that pulsed, growing in intensity with each second. Isabella staggered, holding onto Ricardo to keep from falling. Her eyes gleamed with a terror he had never seen before, a terror greater than anything they had faced inside the mansion. She whispered, her voice almost inaudible, but charged with a deep fear that hit Ricardo like a punch to the stomach. No, it's the Eye of Azazel. He found us. Ricardo had never heard of Azazel, but from the terror in Isabella's eyes, he knew it was something horrible, catastrophic. The constellation, The giant eye and the frightening energy emanating from it conveyed an imminent supernatural threat. What was Azazel? What did that eye in the sky mean? What was the plan behind all this? The questions echoed in his mind, mixing with the growing fear that was taking hold of them. The battle for survival, the fight for love that transcended dimensions, was far from over. In fact, it seemed to have just begun, with an even more powerful and threatening enemy than anything they had faced before. The new danger, with the growing glow in Azazel's eye in the sky, foreshadowed a future full of uncertainties, and an even more desperate struggle to save not only Isabella, but perhaps the world itself. The red moon, now almost disappearing on the horizon, seemed like a last farewell to the relative peace they had found, replaced by the overwhelming and terrifying presence of the eye that watched from the sky. The hook was inevitable. Ricardo felt fear mixed with determination, knowing that the next fight would be the hardest of their lives. They needed to prepare to face an enemy that seemed to be beyond their comprehension, and that was probably linked to the ancestral mysteries that haunted them. Darkness was closer than ever, and the answer was lost somewhere between two worlds, a place full of mysteries, magic, and a love that could be the only hope against the darkness that threatened them. The adventure continued, much darker and more menacing than before. What would become of Ricardo and Isabella in the face of Azazel's immense power?